Hey there, welcome back to the Fuse Show. I'm your host, David Tran, and I'm also the co-founder of Xfusion.io. I'm joined today by John Lensing. He's a co-founder and CEO of Openloop. Thanks for joining us in the show.
Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate being here.
So I recognize you've been studying medicine and then transitioned to being a healthcare practitioner. Oh, sorry, you were transitioned from being a healthcare practitioner to a healthcare platform builder. That is not a common story that you hear. Can you tell our audience how that happened?
Yeah, there's an old adage within medicine that says physicians don't make good businessmen and businessmen don't make good physicians. And so,
Hmm.
yes, in the long run of things, I wasn't supposed to be a good physician. That's why I ended up here. But I guess I'm hoping this ages well and it turns out that I'm a better businessman. But that that transition has been unique for me. I had really no prior business background, but long story short, my father's a rural physician in Iowa. I saw a lot of the struggles that he went through with his patients and what they went through, and ultimately decided to pursue a career in medicine myself. So I went off to undergrad up in Michigan, a small school called Calvin, and then came back to Iowa for medical school. Along the way, I experienced a lot of the same problems that my dad did. We were both seeing patients drive really, really far, hours just to get the care they needed, meaning they would come in sicker. They would require more surgical interventions,
Hmm.
more medications to treat their chronic illnesses. And when we started digging into it, turns out there's just a massive shortage of clinicians across the country. And that's spread across physicians, nurses, therapists, the whole lot. And, I had known from working with other healthcare providers that they have additional hours that they can plug in and want to plug in, but it's really difficult because their schedules are so jumbled.
Hmm.
And so I wanted a way to use those additional hours in a more efficient way. And so that's why I started building Openloop. I really had this idea that we could increase the efficiency and delivery of healthcare by accessing those extra hours. And so that's honestly how I ended up here, David.
So how did you go and when was the point the idea hit you and you're like, dang, I can solve a different side of the problem?
Yeah, honestly, it's not as glamorous of a story as everybody sees
It's
or
okay.
hears about normally. My first co-founder, he was a classmate of mine in medical school, and we were sitting having wings one night, and a lot of our colleagues were doing something called moonlighting. So while they're in their final years of residency, they start picking up additional hours at local hospitals to start paying down student loans.
Hmm.
And when we started talking with them, there's just no good way for them to find those opportunities and get onboarded at them and find something that meets and matches their very unique schedule. And so we started thinking along the lines of like Uber, how as a physician can I plug in my availability and then get matched to opportunities that meet that same schedule that I have? And so that was kind of the nidus for the idea.
Hmm.
Like, hey, let's build this comprehensive matching system that clinicians can enroll and they get all of their hours matched to a location, a hospital or a clinic that could really utilize these additional hours that they had.
Time-wise, where were you in medical school when this happened?
I was in my fourth and final year, about halfway through that, actually.
And I think most people, I mean, like, I think plenty of people brainstorm brilliant ideas, but they don't make it a reality. Like, what made you realize, like, I just don't want to let this idea sit in my head, but I want to bring it into the real world?
And another great question. I think a lot of it just had to do with the problems that we were experiencing within the hospital itself. Um, I was seeing a lot of these patients just come in really sick. And when I started talking with them, they said, yeah, I'm living 3 to 4 hours away. It's just extremely difficult for me to get down here. I have a hospital close to me, but they just don't have a cardiologist,
Hmm.
or my primary care doctor is so backed up I can't get in for 6 months. And to me, it just seemed like there had to be something more that I could do. At my best, you can see 20 to 30 patients a day in clinic. Um,
It's a
and I knew
non-trivial
that,
amount.
yeah, and I knew with these extra hours that I could put clinicians in opportunities and spots where they could, increase that load by another 10 to 15 patients a day. And if you spread that across thousands of physicians, then that really adds up and makes a
Mhm.
difference. And, I wanted to do something more. Um, I guess I'm not really sure what prompted me. For me, it was more of just a question like, okay, let's just start to test it. What's the baseline thing I could do to see if clinicians are interested in something like this and hospitals are interested in it. And so we just put together what was like a very simple website. On the back end, it was just a spreadsheet with Excel. And we had clinician availability plugged in there, what their specialty was, and started calling up hospitals and telling them what we were doing. And a lot of them wanted to enroll right away. So we started signing up a bunch of these hospitals as beta customers and beta users. After that, we started matching up these clinicians. The clinicians loved it because it took off the headache of them calling these hospitals. The hospitals loved it because it saved them all the headache of having to find the physicians and, burden their HR team with backfilling their gaps. And so I guess I had anticipated always just running it as a side thing to be beneficial and useful. But then it really started taking off. And so then it kind of came down to the wire of, do I go on to do any more training? Do I jump into this because I think it's more useful? And then once I graduated, it really became a question now that, okay, stuff is real. And ultimately decided to quit practicing medicine to help more patients.
So at a granular level, you built this website that kind of functions as like a sign-up form for both parties. How then did you like email a bunch of people? Did you put posters up? Like how did you get attention for people to go to this website to sign up in the first place? Or did you just like cold call everybody?
Yeah, that a lot of stories in there. It was cold calling friends that I knew, colleagues that I trusted, colleagues of my dad who had, was a practicing physician for so long. I think we ended up getting like one or two people after like 2 weeks of calling. It was just a very slow process. Started getting talks to all the residency programs in the local area. Again, still a very slow process. I even got to the point where my co-founder and we found this random free list of clinicians in Iowa where we were based out of, had their mailing addresses. We hand wrote over like 200 notes to these people, sent it off. I think close to 50% of them got returned due to wrong addresses. Yeah, spent an entire 2 days doing that, like $200 in postage, and had nobody enroll from that. Started headhunting on LinkedIn. Then we finally started throwing some like digital marketing dollars at it and confined it to the region that we were operating in with the hospitals. And slowly but surely it started picking up from there. Got more people, more clinicians enrolled, and started making those matches.
Was that your first entry into digital marketing or paid digital marketing?
Yeah.
Do you recall what the budget was, and like were you nervous? Because I heard a lot of stories, people like literally pour money into digital marketing and there's like zero return. So it's kind of cool to hear the stories that it does have a return. I mean, obviously it works. So it has to work for somebody.
Yeah, it was like $35 a day, and I did the math. I'm like, oh, that's $1,000 a month, and I was living off student loans. Like, I don't know if we can afford this. But I had additional student loans, living pretty cheaply in grad school. So I was like, okay, here's a quick test. We'll try it for a month. If it doesn't work out, then I know that we were just off on our messaging, or it's not the place to find clinicians.
You mentioned also earlier that there's another co-founder or multiple other co-founders. How did you meet?
So the first co-founder that came up with the idea with me together, he was a classmate of mine, also from Iowa. His father was also a primary care physician in Iowa. And interestingly enough, he went to medical school on a military scholarship. So they paid for all the schooling. And when it came down to it, closer to graduation, I had told him that, I'm thinking about quitting medicine to do this full time. And he really wanted to join me, but he was contractually obligated to go to residency as payback for the military money. And we had known that coming up to graduation. So at that time, because I was so new to the business arena, that I had paired myself up with quite a few local and community mentors. One of them, interestingly enough, was also mentoring somebody else, Christian Williams, my current co-founder and COO. And for us, this was still at the idea stage. Nothing had really happened. We're still fleshing out what a business plan looked like. And our mutual mentor, he told me, he's like, hey, you have to meet Christian. He told Christian, said, hey, you have to meet John. You guys would be perfect for each other. And so Christian was actually working on his own startup at the time. He was building outdoor gyms for public parks and universities. So if you think like a bird scooter where you can go unlock a kettlebell in a public park, use the kettlebell to work out and then put it back and it locks itself back up. Anyway, so I guess out of that, we met a couple times at Starbucks, got dinner together, and then ends up I guess I was a more persuasive one. So I convinced him to join me in my idea rather than the other way around. And so since then we've been tackling this problem together.
How'd you find these mentor or mentors?
The university that I went to, so the undergrad side of the University of Iowa Medical School, they are very big on entrepreneurism. And with that, because I was so new to the entire business world and the entrepreneurship side of things, I picked up every class and course that I could over on the undergrad side. So there's something called the John Papa John Entrepreneurial Center over there. They have a lot of different resources like financial for early stage startups. They try to pair you up with mentors and advisors that are, within your realm of expertise or whatever industry that you're trying to breach into. And so they paired me up with quite a few different people over there, and then eventually narrowed it down to a select group that that I meet with still today, actually.
How much of that entrepreneurship experience in the classroom do you feel match reality, at least reality as you've experienced it thus far?
A lot, to be honest with you. A lot of the hardships that you hear about, you just inevitably face as a founder. No matter how many times you hear the correct things, it's almost a rite of passage that you're going to have to make the same mistake no matter how much you plan for it.
Okay.
One of the big ones is just like hiring. Everybody tells you, be slow to hire, fire fast though, make sure they're a good fit. And I made all the same mistakes as everybody else, but I had heard that same thing, 500 times. So first 3 people that we brought on, turns out they just weren't good fits, not any fault of their own. I think I had just told them, I kind of sold them on what the dream for Openloop was, and not really the reality of where we're at today when I brought them on. And so it was just a mismatch in communication and skills. And ultimately they came in thinking it was going to be something different, and when in reality it really wasn't. And so a lot of the same hardships matched up very well to what we experience and still experience.
What would you say is like the 5 to 10 year vision that you have in your mind now for Openloop?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for everybody here, Openloop now, we've really iterated since our inception. The pandemic initially helped explode us. We were doing a lot of great work. We were assisting hospitals on a free basis. We helped cover over 700 shifts during that time. But then as COVID continued to drag on, the hospital market actually crashed. The only thing they really needed were ICU level physicians and nurses, and the entire industry was crazy. But with that, telehealth took off pretty dramatically. And they experienced a lot of the same growing pains as hospitals just due to the clinician shortage. But they were also taking primary care. They were utilizing specialists. And so we turned our attention towards that. And now the easiest way to describe what we do, David, is we're like a telehealth company that helps power other telehealth companies. We provide white label services, and we do full stack clinical operations. So our clinicians, utilizing our legal, compliance, and regulatory infrastructure, as well as the EHR and video system that we have, see our telehealth clients' patients for them, all on a white label basis. So as telehealth companies continue to grow and expand, they might be operating in 5 to 10 states, but now want to expand to the next 20.
Yeah.
Our clinical teams will step in those expansion states, and we will start seeing their patients for them, and be their growth arm, all underneath their brand name. So that's what we do now. We have always loved the idea of telehealth since we started the company, and we were always planning on getting into it in some capacity, but had no idea when that was going to occur. However, the timeline got pretty accelerated because of the pandemic. It's still very much aligned with what we're trying to accomplish as a company. Our mission is to improve community health outcomes through the accelerated delivery of medical services, with this vision of bringing healing anywhere. And we truly believe that we're still on track to do that. To date, since we've moved into the telehealth space, we've helped see over 25,000 patients over the last 12 months. A metric that we're very, very proud of and excited to continue growing. In the next, back to your question, the next 5 to 10 years, we really see ourselves becoming the the dominant engine that powers all patient visits, be that in person or virtually.
Sorry, you mentioned in person.
I think there's probably a play for us in the future once the pandemic subsides a little bit to move back into that hospital realm and start helping out with a lot more in-person care, like where we started from.
Gotcha. So having a person come in to fill extra hours at a hospital, is that right?
Absolutely.
How do most of these telehealth companies hear of you in the first place?
Honestly, a lot of what we do is cold outbound because what we do is very hard to describe or just search for, especially on this telehealth side, because we operate much like an outsourced virtual clinic, just on a white label basis. And so we do a lot of outbound. We go to different trade shows and conferences. And when people first start talking to us, we've heard this many times. They're always like, I've always looked for a service like this, but had no idea how to explain it. And so you guys came around at the time for us because they just have such high patient demand that they can't meet without us being there. And so it's been really rewarding to see that kind of thing. So cold outbound is probably our biggest channel right now. However, we do spend a lot of time thinking about where our end users and decision makers are probably at and what they're looking for. So we spend a lot of time on content generation, optimizing for search engine searches. And then we do some paid digital now.
So as it relates to your company's goal of pursuing this mission of bringing health or healing everywhere, do you notice if there's any trends between people like looking for health or the doctors and or clinicians looking for opportunities and helping out in a remote capacity locally, or do a lot of people work cross states and cross time zones?
Oh, now with telehealth, there's many, many people who work across states and time zones. For us, we have a lot of clinicians that come in with 5 to 10 state licenses. We have some that come in with single state licenses, and then we have a licensing team that'll help process more so we can help expand their reach and expand their care.
I see. How difficult is it to go from getting licensing in one state to getting additional state licensing?
Depends on the type of clinician. For a nurse, it's very, very easy. There's something called the compact license. And so that gets them access to 30 plus states just from filing for one state license. For physicians, they do have something called that or something like that. It's called the IMLC, Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. You have to get a compact license, but then you can very quickly add new states to it.
I see.
But for filing for a single state as a physician, it can take about 3 to 4 months sometimes to get approved in a new state.
Dang. That's so much room for improvement.
A lot of room. Something that maybe we'll tackle in the next company.
So as you tackle this expansion challenge, how are you thinking about like the business model itself? Like, are you monetizing based on like commission rates, or how does your company fund its operations?
Yeah, great question. So we have a twofold business model. So we charge a monthly platform access fee, pretty much like a SaaS fee, get some access to the technology that we built, the ability to source and find the correct clinicians that they're utilizing. It also covers some of the operational overhead, like the malpractice insurance that we provide our clinicians. And then we have a transactional take rate on, it's a commission essentially on top of the clinician's wages. And then we invoice our clients for that.
So what are the sorts of things that could someone as a patient could see a telehealth professional versus having to go in office and maybe deal with lines and waits and queues? Like, what are the top cases you'll see that you think that are underappreciated by consumers?
Telehealth is very interesting. It's the companies that are growing within the space and the ones that we see being very strong into the future are ones that are filling roles traditionally unmet by in-person medicine. The ones that are successful are not competing with traditional medicine, if you will. And so it's very segmented, problem by problem telehealth. And what I mean by that is like the row in the Hims and the Keeps, they do like a specific problem. So like hair loss or erectile dysfunction or male fertility, female fertility, prescription renewals alone, smoking cessation or addiction treatment, gut health like IBS and IBD. It's each of these companies are focusing on a segment of a general specialty,
I see.
and then really owning that problem. And those are the companies that are being very, very successful. Patients are looking for customized care. They want a provider who understands the exact problem that they're facing, and they want easy access to it.
Right.
The other route for them is go see their primary care doctor, get a referral, and it might be 8 months before they get any answers. And so consumers and patients are really liking this new ability to access care on a timeline that means something to them.
It's funny that you mentioned that referral system, because it's literally where I'm at right now. I'm currently in Texas, and I'm at like the third tier of referrals. And I just got a call today saying like, hey, actually, we got this referral, but we can't process it because your insurance doesn't accept it. I'm like, gosh darn it. Then why was it referred in the first place?
Yeah. Horrible.
So many inefficiencies. So much. I am so glad people are working in healthcare tech, because so much needs to get changed.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So as it relates to you being an entrepreneur of at least there are some technical components of your business, right? Like you mentioned some software, both on the video conferencing side as well. I'm assuming there's also like a messaging platform. I assume there's also like a secure electronic health record system that you need to build out and protect. How did you learn all the things that are related to that domain? Because something tells me they don't teach that in medical school.
I still don't know, to be honest with you, David.
Okay.
The best advice I have for anybody who's looking to get into this startup realm is always hire people that are smarter than you, and you're bound to do some great things together. And so we have a wonderful CTO who was our first hire that we brought on. We really consider him to be like an unofficial third co-founder. He had about 10 years of experience building healthcare and blockchain technologies. And he is incredible. Could not be doing this without him. And then my co-founder Christian actually has some very entry level skills on the tech side too that he's been able to plug in and be very useful on.
I think I saw a reference to Techstars on your LinkedIn profile. Is that right?
Yeah. So we went through Techstars about a year ago. Actually, the hospital market was crashing. We weren't really sure what we were going to do. It was we were looking at telehealth with a sideways glance, but unsure if we wanted to enter that market. Techstars started in September for us last year. And within those first few weeks of Techstars, that's when we made that pivot directly into telehealth. Haven't looked back since.
What was your experience like? What did you learn? What did you take away from the program?
It's interesting. Christian and I synced up after we were done with the program and really just laid it all out on what value did we think that each of us derived from it.
Yeah.
And it was pretty contrasting. And so I think the one thing that we really found common ground on was the personality assessments that we went through. It was super interesting. So within the first weeks, we had to go through a battery of different personality tests and meet with this counselor who kind of told us, this is the way that you are structured, the way that you think. Here's how you respond to different types of emotions like happiness, elation, stress, guilt, and how Christian and I overlapped. We're actually on opposite ends of the spectrum on everything. And so knowing how each of us reacts provided a lot of clarity on how we should interact together as co-founders. And so, that was something we both took a lot of value out of.
Was that a test they made, or was that a test that is it like a more typical like Ocean or Myers-Briggs or Enneagram type of test?
I think it was an Enneagram type test that had been modified specifically for like executive leaders or people running businesses.
Okay, continue.
And then I guess the other piece that I derived from Techstars that were more different than Christian's, I found value in the network that they bring. And so being connected to the correct people, I've learned I learned very quickly after entering the space that who is a very valuable currency in startups.
Right.
And so being connected to the correct people who knew the correct people to get me where I needed to be has been invaluable. Also, as the CEO, I'm in charge of making sure that we have enough funding to keep the lights on what we're doing, and that access to investors through the Techstars network was also very, very helpful. So we raised a seed round right after we came out of programming. On the other side of things, Christian, he really derived a lot of value in how to effectively build teams. So Christian is in charge of our hiring process right now and making sure that our headcount is aligned with the operational needs that we have at each time point. And then I think his second biggest piece too was how to effectively scale operations quickly. And so that is something that we both, lacked a little more experience on. And Techstars provide a lot of good programmatic lessons and talks on how to do that effectively.
When you think about operations as it relates to your company, what do you think about? Like, what's the first few things that come to mind as under the umbrella term of operations?
Oh man, that's a big can to open. When I think about operations, just right away, the first thing that pops in my mind is bottlenecks. And that's kind of the way I look at the entire business. It's like, from a macro level view, it's like, what is my current bottleneck right now? And I'm going to optimize that and solve it to 60% perfect. I'm going to solve it just well enough to the point where it's no longer my bottleneck at that time.
Right.
And then it's on to the next bottleneck. And it's optimized that until it's no longer my bottleneck. And it's just this cyclical pattern, so that by the time you're 5 to 10 bottlenecks down the road, chances are the first one you started with is now your bottleneck again. And so it's this incremental change that drives a lot of increased efficiency over time. Because if you solve something too well right away, chances are in a startup you're going to come back and redo the whole thing right down the road. So that's the first thing that pops in my mind when I think operations. For me, on a more granular level, it's implementation. That's kind of the current bottleneck we're facing. Our sales have been picking up pretty dramatically. Our demand has really skyrocketed. And so now it's just, I need the correct people on the team in order to start delivering operationally for these clients.
How big's the team now?
The team, I believe, is 32 full-time now.
And what's the breakdown of different departments?
Yeah, so there's 2 in marketing, there's 5 in sales, 5 in recruitment, 11 on product, 4 on licensing, credentialing, and compliance stuff, 1 finance, and the rest are operations.
Okay, that's a lot of people on product. A lot of features to build, I bet.
A lot of features to build.
Do you have, how far of a roadmap do you have as it relates to like product development in mind?
Oh, we're probably out 18 to 24 months now on roadmap.
Solid length.
Yeah, it's but I mean, as you know, everything keeps getting added to the dev queue, so it keeps getting longer.
Can you walk me through like a typical day? I recognize maybe there's no true typical day, but like how about like this past month? What is a typical day in the seat of the entrepreneur or the CEO seat of Openloop look like?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of people ask me this, and I have really no good answer. I'd say I'd break it down. Probably 25% of my day is sales. Whether that be big like account management of new contracts that we've signed, talking with some like high dollar clients for us or bigger organizations, drafting like customized proposals for some of these like enterprise level accounts that we've been pursuing. I think another 25% is like operations, and the majority of that is probably financial and legal. Contract review with our legal if we're going into a new type of specialty, or working with our finance guy in-house to project our runway. What does our current forecast look like, et cetera? I'd say another quarter of it is probably investor relations, be that our board or our investors directly, or if I'm in the fundraising seat, then a lot of my time is spent there too. So 25, 25, 25, and then the last 25 is team management, I would say. Making sure people are in the correct place where they need to be. Coordinating everything with Christian, making sure everything from an operational standpoint is good. And then within that team management structure, I would also say just strategy. So what does the lay of the land look like now for us? What does the next 3 months, 6 months look like? And then what are we trying to accomplish in 3 to 5 years that's really going to set us apart?
So when you first got started, what was your thoughts on how much friction there would be in the legal process, and what is your understanding of the legal issues that you face now?
Oh, I knew legal would be a pain. We're dealing with one of the most litigious industries in the entire world, and so that's probably our biggest line item in budget is legal right now, unfortunately. So I knew that going in. I was eyes wide open to the fact. We've tried to limit as much as we can, but reality is it still is a big hit on monthly burn.
Did you at what point did you hire on your first legal consultant or legal counsel? Was it like right away, or did you wait a while?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Are you familiar with the ACT, like the test that high schoolers take?
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, ACT is headquartered in Iowa. And when I was in my first year of medical school, I was studying in Starbucks in Iowa City. I think I had a test on like reproductive endocrinology or something. And this old gentleman sits down across the table from me, just, pure snow white hair, and strikes up a conversation with me. And I think within the first minute of him talking to me, he goes, "Well, you probably hate me." And I like, that's a very strange thing to say for somebody. And I'm like, why do you say that? And he goes, "Did you take the MCAT to get to medical school?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Did you take the ACT to get into college?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I was actually the CEO of the company that made all those tests." And so it turns out he's a 80-year-old gentleman. His name is Dick Ferguson. He was the CEO of ACT for like 22 years. And he struck up a conversation and was just super interested in my life. Anyway, fast forward, he became a life mentor for me for like 4 years prior to me starting the company.
From a random interaction in a cafe.
From a random interaction.
I need to go to more cafes.
And he actually serves as our board chair to date. So after he left ACT, he's been in the startup scene ever since. And because I had zero business knowledge, he kind of acted as a business coach and mentor when I first brought him the idea and talked with him over it. And so he is very much by the book. Like from the very first time we met, he's like, "You got to establish some bylaws. It's time to get incorporated." And he says, "I have this attorney friend who I've done a lot of work with for the past 20 years. He offers discounted rates to startups and it's very affordable." So we actually engaged with our counsel right away, even for the first formation of the entity, et cetera, bylaws, articles of incorporation, whole works. And so I think probably within the first 2 or 3 months of having the idea, we engaged with counsel.
That's cool. As you meet all these people, as you incorporate more people into your team, are there certain principles you think about in your head, like, oh, for me to find a good fit for this person, or for this person to be a good fit in the team, they should have X, Y, and Z cultural values as an individual?
Yeah, so we have 3 different pillars that we try to build our company on. And so the first 2 are autonomy and competence. A lot of those go hand in hand. If you're competent, then our goal is to get you in a position of responsibility where you can work autonomously with little managerial oversight. You know what tasks need to be done. You do them, and you're able to future cast and work on the next things that need to be done without direct oversight all the time. And then the third one that we build on is belonging. So we are very protective of the culture that we've built. We all interact very, very well, very tight-knit community. And so we want to foster a sense of belonging for the company. And then the last pillar, it's kind of like an unofficial fourth one, is we see our company as a meritocracy. So nobody here is a very like strong role player. We don't lean into massive hierarchy.
Right.
We establish clear guidelines and responsibilities on, who has final decisions within departments. But we've had times where interns have brought some of the best ideas forward and we run with them. So we reward great ideas, and everybody's work is equally as valuable as the next person. So fully believe that we're building this meritocracy. As far as what we look for in people, we have become much better at hiring. If we think they can find those core values, then likely they're a good fit. But we make it very, very clear from the first interview that we have that we are a startup. Here's our current runway. Lights might be off at the end of this. This is a very risky and volatile situation. Here's the job description and job role that we're hiring you for right now, but I might have you doing a million different things. Hours are probably going to be normal 40-hour work weeks, but there's going to be some days where, if you have to take off to go home early, that's fine. But there might be other days where we ask you to stay till 8 or 9 because we have a big impending deadline that needs to get done and crunched. And so being very clear that is a dumpster fire underneath the hood has been a game changer in hiring for us. So if anybody can take that sort of stress test and still say at the end that, no, I'm super interested, this seems like an opportunity that I want to, or a challenge that I want to tackle, then those sort of things with a very good gut instinct usually leads to a pretty good hire.
That's something that I wish I knew when I first started hiring. I feel like I should incorporate that more often. That's a good idea. It's just making sure it's a self-selecting pool of people who are at some point at least a little bit crazy not to take on the risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the last question I have here that I would like to ask you is what's something you've been learning recently that you wish you knew years ago?
Oh, I think so when I went to college, I was all about the sciences, in math, very STEM focused kind of student, and very data driven, right? You have to be when you're in that kind of in those fields. Like before I made any decision, I wanted to lay out all the possible outcomes. I wanted all the data that I needed to make a clear decision that I knew wouldn't be wrong. And in the startup industry, if you have that kind of mentality, you will fail. You will not move fast enough. And so one of our favorite quotes around here is, if you're not embarrassed by the first product that you've shipped too late. And I think this kind of plays out into a lot of different actual insights. And so when I've helped other people in the past, the one thing that I've told them is, the old adage is that like good guys never win. My corollary to that is neither do the smart ones. And smart ones being the data-driven ones. In this type of field, you need 60% of the data, or even 51%. You need just enough data that points you in one direction or the other, and the rest is all a gut instinct, and you got to run with it. People are making calculated bets all the time, and if you're not doing that yourself, you're going to lose in the long run.
I like it. I operate that way too. I feel like speed is such a strength in startups that you can't forego it. And if you forego speed,
absolutely,
you're giving yourself a huge target.
Yeah, you'll never have that speed if you're looking for 100% of the data that you need to make a decision either.
Cool. Well, thank you, John, for your time. I've enjoyed this conversation with you. Before we close the call, I just wanted I want to give you an opportunity. So for anyone who's in the audience and is interested in, joining your company or reaching out to you or just following your company along in your journey, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly, John, Jon, at openloophealth.com. You can find us on LinkedIn at Openloop, our website, openloophealth.com. We are always looking for the best and brightest minds, trying to surround ourselves with people much smarter than us, and crazy about doing great things.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for joining us in the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you, David.